Hello, everyone. This is the Seven Thunders podcast. I'm here with my two friends, Mr. Blue and Mr. Green, and I'm Mr. Black. So today we're going to focus on one of the main big topics of happening in today's society, and that is the relationship between African Americans and white Americans. And we're going to see where this conversation goes. I know Mr. Blue specifically has a lot of opinions on this, so let's get started.
Well, the first conversation, the first topic, leave white people alone. And the reason why I want to bring this up, Mr. Blue and Mr. Black, is because white people I see are totally demonized in the United States. And with this woke culture, basically this idea is being perpetuated that all white people are racist. We're putting white people in this box, and it's polarizing the United States. It's polarizing people within America. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was essentially this topic, demonization of white people. Have you seen that in day-to-day society? Do you see that with this cancel culture, this is being perpetuated more?
Well, I would like to share that as a college student, I actually got to see both sides. I studied in a liberal arts college at a university, and after high school, before college, I was put on to a lot of the minority insight of racism, and of that perspective, what comes to mind is this double standard. I was teaching myself about racism, and what I learned is that the word racism actually is the thought that one race is better than another. So when I was taught through this show called Dear White People that black people cannot be racist, I was thinking, wow, that is a double standard. How can a black person can think a white person is less than them, but somehow it's not racism, but a white person can say something like, oh, I don't believe the police are corrupt, and then that person gets called racist. So it threw me off, and as a younger adult, I was just very thrown off by the fact that why is there's so much confusion, there's such a double standard. I could definitely relate to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it began with Ibram X. Kennedy's work to being anti-racist.
Yeah.
And pretty much his whole kind of point is that the way to fix discrimination in the past is to have present discrimination. Whether or not you believe that's true, I don't believe that's true. When you have discrimination against white people, the problem with that is that we're still the majority of the country.
Yeah.
And most people, honestly, when you ask me about daily life, it almost never comes up. Right. It's mostly like an online social media issue, which pushes more radical views on people.
Yes.
So mostly in daily life, it's really not a thing that's happening. The problem is that over time, it will continue to seep into real life. And we kind of see that with have you heard of the recent Karen story? So there's this 6 months old pregnant nurse who went up went to go use a bike around a group of black teens. And they're like, hey, that's my bike. And they're trying to take it from her and whatever. And so far, it's fairly unclear exactly who was in the wrong in that situation.
Right.
Because both brought receipts. But still, the first immediate response was, hey, the Karen or the white lady is actually the one who was in the wrong here.
Yeah.
And that was immediately publicized. She got let go from her job and everything.
Exactly.
And I think that's an example of okay, well, in the past,
Correct.
40 years ago, it would be the opposite. We have Emmett Till situations.
Right.
But nowadays, it's slowly switching over to the other side from a point where it was kind of balancing between where it's like, hey, yeah, let's look at every situation individually.
Correct.
So I think for now, it's not so bad in real life. I mean, there's people getting fired from their jobs and everything, but it's not like I walk on the street like, hey, man, how's your day going? And someone attacks me.
Exactly.
Or even the opposite. But I think if we keep radicalizing, if we keep pushing things like this
Exactly.
forward, it's going to get worse and worse and worse.
It's going to get worse. And really, two wrongs don't make a right. You can't sit there and put all white people in one box. And there's situations all around the states where these white people are losing their jobs, they're losing their lives because they do not want to be on the spotlight. They don't want to be persecuted. These people's jobs that they work for don't want to be persecuted. They don't want to be canceled. So they're letting go these incredible people as a result. And all of these situations are put in one box instead of a case-by-case scenario.
Yeah, I guess on my question on that, because we can talk about people getting fired from their jobs specifically. And I think it's important to have a set standard and principle in which it's like, yeah, okay, this is a fireable offense. Like, this isn't good. Because, for example, like, you're obviously African-American. What would you say would be, like, the line in which it's like, hey, no, this is unprofessional behavior and people should get fired? Because I think we can all agree that there is a line there.
There's totally a line. You know, Martin Luther King said, judge people by the content of their character, you know? So basically when people attack you specifically for your race, like it's very obvious, like, hey, I'm going after you because you're a black person, because you're a Mexican, because you're Asian, and you're doing this, you know, and they make it obvious and very known, like, hey, this is why I'm attacking you. This is why I don't want you here. Then it's obvious, like you're slandering this person's race because you have a prejudice within your own heart. That's not okay. But even in those situations, it should be case by case. When somebody is physically harming someone because of race, that's okay. That's an obvious offense. But somebody simply saying, hey, like, who are you? I don't really know if you live around here. That person shouldn't lose their job that they've worked for 40 years, you know?
So, yeah, I guess on that, and let me know what you think, Mr. Green, because I want to hear your opinion too.
Sure.
Because it's almost like you have two ways to view situations, right? In one way, you have the way in which you view each situation by an individual case, and therefore you make judgments based on that specific interaction.
Nice.
And then you have, okay, well, let's look at the whole history of everything that has happened in the past 400 years and judge all of that also on this individual case. It's almost like a different way of thinking that is trying to be put into America.
Yes.
Where it's not simply like, well, race matters. Obviously, that's the main thing. But it's like, hey, we need to take into account every single thing that has ever happened in the past to judge this situation properly.
Yep.
And I don't know. I don't think that's a reasonable way to do anything. Because then,
exactly,
like, how much would we have to do to make up for the prejudice and the suffering of African Americans in the past?
You can't.
Exactly.
You can't.
You literally cannot. It was an atrocity. The likes of which the world has seen, like, you know, the Barbary slave trade, all these other places.
Right.
But now it's like, okay, well, how far back do we need to go to take into account? Like, should we go back to be like, well, you know, Africans in North Africa persecuted Christians and white people and sold them into slavery. So actually,
correct.
So it's like a question of like, okay, well, if we're going to have this new standard where we look back on history and make judgments based off of it,
right?
How far back should we go?
Right.
Right. To weigh in, I completely believe in generational wealth being a real thing. You know, if your grandparents were multimillionaires, there's a good chance you'll be well off as opposed to your grandparents, you know, working a minimum wage job. So in that sense, there is an argument, but I think you made a great point, because it's like, what about the inequality of certain Europeans versus Irish Europeans or different castes of Europeans? We don't, the European descending people in America don't talk about that at all, because that's not marketable. I don't know what started this. It's like, we talk about empowerment, which I believe is incredible, because it wasn't even in the last 100 years that just, you know, hate was the way, like segregation was the to like play the victim is the opposite of black empowerment. When I was
Exactly.
taking these classes in school, it's like, let's complain about what happened 60 years ago. Let's complain about what happened 200 years ago. Let's take this case of just this terrible atrocity. But at the end of the day, we're just writing a paper on inequality. Whereas like, here I am, I'm a young student at a public university. I'm like, I'm fired up. I want to make a change, but we weren't actually going after
Changing.
anything.
Right.
And that's what I see in the news is like, here's another cop who either is racist or made a mistake, but now it's like we're gonna riot or we're gonna say the police system is corrupt. But what about the African American crime on the police? Like there's the story of this woman, black police officer in Chicago, and she was shot and killed, but no one is rioting against African Americans because then that would be considered racist. So I think my big standard and takeaway from all of this is there's quite a double standard. And just one thing I really want to speak about that at the time I thought it was cool, but now I'm like, that's just totally not fair. Is one time I was at a social gathering, there's this African American friend of mine. He came up to me, he's like, you know what, Mr. Green, I've met 3 white people in my life that are cool, and you're one of them. Like, imagine if a white person said that to a black person, especially if it was publicized. That could be twisted
Correct.
and just turn into something terrible. And now, like on the internet, there's so much clickbait people. If you follow CNN, if you follow these different platforms that talk about inequality, it's almost like you're looking for something to complain about. But I guess what I'm getting from all of this is like, it's there's always going to be hate, there's always going to be racism, there's always going to be people making mistakes. But like, what's the point of bringing this to the light? Is it just to play the victim, or is it actually to like make a change?
Yeah, and I think there is kind of what you're saying, like, hey, we need to, when we see these things, we do need to make sure we actually like make changes that are appropriate to fix the situation in the long term. Like, I know one of the things where it's like, well, police brutality in the black community is like a problem, so then let's pull police presence out of that community. Okay, well, does that really solve the problem, or is that going to increase crime? Well, it increased crime. And now you have, Detroit, you have all these places that in inner cities pulled out their police officers. Baltimore pulled out the police officers. I think there was 10 robberies in 30 minutes in Chicago last weekend. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so but then people will be like, well, it's poverty that causes crime. And I would say there's an argument that crime causes poverty. But it's like, okay, well, what they need is actually more policing, and they need higher standard police officers that know what they're doing and able to police communities and serve them correctly. And then that will, one, reduce the rates of police brutality, because police won't need to use brutality because they're better trained.
Yeah, and I just want to say something here. Thank you so much, Mr. Blue and Mr. Black. Obviously, I'm a black man, and I want to call out CNN, Washington Post, ABC, because we're being told lies. We're being told complete lies about the state of racism within this country. What is perpetuated is this black is what's being perpetuated is essentially that black men are being hunted by the police. And statistically, that is not true. When you look at the actual data, when you look at the actual facts. I learned this from my professor, my black professor, who was a 60-year-old black man at university. And he told us, take a look at the actual facts. Police killing people by race. What does it show? And I want to bring up some facts for you today. In 2017, 458 people were killed by police. 458 white people were killed by police. 222 black people were killed by police. Let's skip down to 2020. 459 white people were killed by police. And then 243 black people were killed by police. Well, that's old statistics. Let's talk about today. Well, let's talk about today. How about that? In 2023, 80 white people were killed by police. Okay? 42 blacks were killed by police. So, and a lot of people will say, well, the ratio, there's more white people in the United States in the population than there are black people. And yes, that is true. But at the very least, social media as well as these huge news outlets should make the point that it's even, that there is not this horrific, awful, horrible thing going on toward black people and the police. This is the mark of the devil. This is Satan trying to destroy society by polarizing people. And this is happening through politics. And it's an awful thing happening.
Okay, question for both of you. So from a news standpoint, from a platform, it makes sense why there's an opinion, because with forming an opinion, you gain a certain amount of viewers.
Right.
You know, you have to have an opinion. Otherwise, they just be statistics on the news, and that's not exciting. No one kicks back and just wants to be entertained by statistics unless you're very objective. But my question to you, why as a community, especially both white and black, minority at all, why are we more driven towards this bipolarity instead of like, wow, let's talk to the other side?
That's
if
a
we
good
really
question.
are about peace, why are we butting heads? Because calling white people, you know, the devil or this system is just as bad as white people pushing butting heads as well, because you know, there, like in high school I was like, yeah, we talked about race, we talked about diversity. In college we did the same thing, but I'm like, why is there so much? Like, you go on Fox, they're talking about one thing, you go on CBS, they're talking about another, but it's like this. Why is it not like that, especially if we're trying to make progress and it's 2023?
Mr. Black?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. On the point of the media, they just make more money.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. Like, what gets more clicks? Black men killed by police, or two people got together and had a great conversation, solidified a community for the good of the community. People are more naturally drawn, and this is, I think, an evolutionary thing where if you're in a room and out of the corner of your eye, 30 feet away, you can see a spider, but you're not going to notice a lollipop. It's because our brain is naturally evolved to detect things that make us fearful or make us anxious.
Yeah.
And so we pay more attention to it because obviously the cost of me missing a spider and it biting me is going to be a lot higher than me missing a lollipop. Like, if I get bit by a spider, I could lose a leg if it's poisonous enough. So I think that's one of the reasons why people are naturally attracted towards more negative news. And also, in the matter of bringing people together, I think in the United States, it's kind of just an arrogant, ignorant nation. Because we've been the world superpower, because our public education system is so poor, and because Americans travel so little, we can't really see what the rest of the world is like. And that we don't really understand how great we have it here. Even if you're an African American, like, I don't know, King, what African nation would you like to move to?
If I could move to any African nation,
rather than living in the United States.
I would love to stay in the United States. I love the United States, but Ethiopia is pretty cool.
Ethiopia is pretty cool. But even in African nations, you have like fights, like the Igbo and the other. What's the other people group in Nigeria? It's the Igbo and.
I'm not familiar with that.
Even those two tribes in Nigeria,
right.
They're fighting constantly. Like, nations separate. In China, like, they're racist against everyone. The Japanese are racist against everyone. Like in Europe, where they look at like, oh, well, Norway doesn't have any racists. It's like, well, Norway is 99.95% white. Like, they haven't had a chance to be racist.
Exactly.
So it's crazy in the United States because we have, I think, 15% of the population is African American.
Somewhere.
Mexican American descents are rising like highly. I think white is still 70%.
Yeah.
We are truly one of the few mixed nations on this earth. And you can say,
Yeah.
well, like, okay, well, Northern Europe, like France and all these other places are becoming like world places where all people can go to.
Correct.
And I think that most people don't understand that.
Yeah.
Like if you go to Mexico, you see Mexicans. If you go to Arizona, you see everything. You go to New York, you see everything.
Yep.
And it's the fact that America is kind of the world superpower. You know, we're the new Byzantine nation where like all people come here. Is that we're actually not doing that bad. I mean, obviously, we do have the African American descendants who are slaves, and it's funny. You don't know what's interesting? So I was reading Malcolm X.
Okay.
And Malcolm X, in his excerpt, said something about American racism that I want to get your guys' opinion on.
Sure.
So he said, the white people are so silly, they don't even know what they're racist against. He said that one day I dressed up in African garb, and he changed his name to a more African name, and he sat down at a whites-only restaurant and had a nice meal and was treated kindly. But when he walked in as an African American, he was treated poorly. So it's interesting because in America, and I haven't really talked about it that much, so I want to see your guys' insight.
Sure.
Where it's like, I think it's specifically not necessarily a race issue, because we actually have a friend from Angola, and she's like waving the Trump flag, which is hilarious.
Right.
But like it's specifically this history of slavery in the United States and those connected to it
Exactly.
that are affected by racism. So
Yeah.
I want, and that's from as far as from what I understand from Malcolm X. I'm sure there's Malcolm X experts here who would disagree. But what do you guys think about that?
Well, that's very interesting. It brings a whole different level of insecurity within the Black community as well as other communities. Basically, in response to that, I honestly think that Africans are seen as more civilized than Black Americans, and you know there's no right or wrong here, but Africans typically think African Americans feel like Africans think that they are better than us in some areas, and then some Africans feel like African Americans think that we're better than them, and that's really good because that goes into my next topic. I think everybody's racist. So this is what racism means to me. It's essentially somebody making a judgment of your character, of who you are internally, because of the pigment of your skin, because of the color of your skin. They make judgments about your character, and these judgments are typically negative.
Okay. Can you give an example of like what something racist would be? Because like, for example, if I see you're from France and I hear you're French, I'm like, this guy probably is a jerk.
Yeah.
You know?
No,
that would be considered racist?
Exactly. That's
so
exactly.
Is it solely on the color of the skin, your nation, or what?
No, that's real. So it could be nation, because I typically, when I look at French people, I typically am like, oh well, these people are probably mean.
Yeah,
because that's
and good at cooking.
You know what I'm saying? But yeah, it could be nation, race, like it's typically associated with that. One of my examples, I see an Asian woman driving, and you know, I automatically assume that the woman can't drive.
Yeah.
So this
You
goes
assume
further.
she has high insurance rates.
This goes further into my point that I believe everybody's racist, and we can the solution to racism. Here's the solution to racism, and I want to hear your point, Mr. Green. Is that we simply have to identify with ourselves that we are prejudiced, we are racist. It doesn't matter who you are. And there's no double standard. Like, Black people are not immune to racism. You know what I'm saying? White people are not the only people that are racist. Asians are racist. Hispanics, we're all racist. And if we simply acknowledge that, then we can begin to understand like how to love people.
Bro, I want to dig a little deeper. So one thing that I've learned, because the term racism is very hot. That is a hot topic. But
Hot.
when I was younger, just going into college, what I was taught and what I was educated on myself, just because separate from bias, like what's the definition of racism is the belief that one race is better than another. Because you can have bias, a positive bias. Oh, you're 6'10", you're good at basketball. Oh, you're black, you are a better athlete than me. That's
Right.
not hate.
Right.
So there is a difference that we should probably
It's a good point.
point out. But for me, like the thing that got me is like, no, like, yeah, it's like one thing I was also taught. You have bias. It's a part of survival.
Yeah.
If the stove is hot and it's fire, oh, I assume it's hot.
Mm.
I assume that when it smells like bacon, that there's bacon there.
Whoa.
There's shortcuts, because if we were to take our time with everything, we would there have to be more than 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, and I think I know where you're coming from, where you're like, people are naturally have pattern recognitions, and we naturally put things in boxes in our heads. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like, stoves are hot, therefore I can use it for cooking, but if I touch it, it'll hurt myself.
Most definitely.
Okay.
And I would not say this is the case, but if you live in a white suburban area, you don't have black friends, but you watch Fox News and you see that black people are thugs, that black people aren't educated, that black people are the reason for crime, then you'd build up this prejudice based on stuff that you're being fed. But in the same way, if you don't go out of your way to learn about the other side, I say you're part of the problem. I don't know if this is off topic or where you guys wanted to pick up from.
That's fine. That's fine.
You asked for a solution, right? Or
Yeah.
you want to touch on
solution? Yeah. I want to hear, Mr. Black's response to everyone's racist. What do you think?
Yeah, I think because right now the academic definition of racism is you can't be black. I mean, you can't be racist and black, because to be racist, you have to have a history of oppressing a group of people. I think your definition of racism is definitely prejudice. I think people does have natural prejudice, and that kind of goes on to what Mr. Green was saying, where one, we do naturally put people in a box because it simplifies decision making. Like, I'm going to interact with this person a certain way because in the past this has worked appropriately. And I think for my definition of racism, I would be that you have a negative association with a group because you see them as lesser than your group.
Yeah.
So for example, like I would never marry, I mean, I would, this is hypothetical, but as a racist,
right.
It's like, I would be like, I would never marry this group of people because that would lessen my bloodline.
Yeah.
Now that is like the most, like that's Harry Potter levels of, that's Voldemort levels of racism. So I think in mine, that's a very narrow definition, because I think we need to hold on to the evils of racism. I think one of the big problems is that racism has been broadened out to a point where it's like, oh, everyone's racist. Isn't this great?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so no one really is. It's like, no, we need to have a separate category for people that are truly evil.
Yeah.
For like David Duke, for these people who are, these people who are truly like, hey, no, black people are lesser than me because of their ethnicity. And I think if we broaden out that term too much, we're going to start getting like, people crying wolves, where, hey, this person's racist, and this person's racist. I'm like, well, those guys don't seem that bad, so I think I'm going to still associate with them. Like today, like every white person's racist. Okay, so then just being white is racist. And it's like, okay, there's not going to be a lot of negative association to that term. As for what Cody was saying when it comes to pattern recognitions in history, here's one solution. I think racism and racial tensions in the United States is a variable thing, that there's a lot of stuff. I think one way to cool it down right now, and this is probably going to be shocking, is that don't point it out as much. Because what happens is, like, let's say you have Fox News being like, hey, a group of young black men beat up a white person, and you have CNN, MSNBC like, hey, an officer killed a black man. Both sides who are watching that individually are going to continue to have negative associations. There's this one really interesting game where there's circles and squares, and it goes through and it takes photos of media and people who are playing it. And what people focus on is that's what they keep on reoccurring, and they start getting that pattern recognition. So if people just stop paying attention to race constantly and giving attention to it online, through media, because then what happens is, like, let's say, oh, I only show videos of black people hurting white people or white people hurting black people. And the other side is going to show more to try to disprove that other's narrative. And so in the process of trying to disprove each other's narrative, they're just going to build upon narrative on narrative on narrative on top of each other, eventually like putting in a massive schism to people.
No, that's real. That's real. I think, and to add on that, I appreciate both of you guys' opinions. These are incredible ideas. Something that I learned from the Bible, John chapter 13, 34 through 35. Jesus actually says, love one another as I have loved you. So you'll love. This is how you must love one another if you want to be my disciple. And basically what that's teaching is you have to love people who hate you. Jesus didn't just love people who like jived with him. He loved people who wanted to murder him. He loved people who spit in his face. And in the same way, I think the way to essentially cure racism, on top of what you guys mentioned, is you have to learn to understand somebody who hates you instead of adding fire to adding instead of inflaming it more, you have to try to understand the other perspective, understand the other side, and then you have compassion. And with compassion comes patience. And you learn to love people for who they are, love people deeply.
Yeah, I think a practical example of that is there's this one guy, I forget his name, but he was a black man, and he would go befriend Ku Klux Klan members.
Yes, that guy. Yeah.
Do we know his name? All right. Well, this is a terrible podcast. I'm sorry, everyone. We don't know anyone's names here. Where one is that he went through and he just simply introduced them to black people. They're like, hey, we exist as something different from the pattern recognition that has been placed on your mind by your group.
Yes, exactly.
And when they did that, they're like, yeah, dude, I didn't know you guys like music. And we started playing rock and roll together, and that really changed my mind about black people. And it's like, that's all it took.
Yep.
Like just hanging out with someone. And I think that's the thing, is that we need to start breaking barriers where we're starting to stereotype, where it's like we leave white people alone, where not like, instead of like, okay, well, we need to break down these two stereotypes. We're like, no, we need to build these stereotypes up harder and stronger and more fortified, and then have them fight, and whoever wins at the end wins. Instead, we need to break down those stereotypes. Not all white people are one group. Not all black people are one group. Not all Asian Americans, not all Native Americans, not all these people are one group. Like, there's a wide variety. Like, there are country African Americans and there are country Native Americans who are more proud of America than I am.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, dude, that's sweet. I mean, we've made our mistakes, but yeah, God bless America.
Right.
And it's like, through this, looking at each person individually and actually dealing with your small social group, and the people you interact with daily, instead of billions and thousands and millions of people online. Because when you deal with thousands and millions of people, you have to make generalizations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think, is that people need to get offline, go touch grass, and meet people.
Go touch grass, meet people. I actually used to be racist toward white people. I had a huge prejudice, especially toward older white men. I had actual racist experiences with white people. My friends back in elementary school, they would be like, King, we like you because you're black. You're not like the other Iggers. And they would say that. You're not like the other Iggers. You're not. They would say this. You're not an Igger. You're black.
Oh, okay.
And that's why we love you. And I didn't register that until I got older. Like, what is going on here? So it's very interesting what's happening. I want to talk about another topic here. Basically, I feel like this is what I've seen. I feel like everything that is happening within news networks and social media and this polarization, I believe that for people who are not as cultured, so for white people, let's take the average young white kid who grows up in white America suburb, and his parents have great intentions. His parents are not, let's say he lives in the northern United States, whatever. And this kid goes to school, and there's like 2 black kids at school, but he mainly hangs out with his white friends because the school's 98% white people. But then he starts to see on social media and on news this victimization of black people. And he sees black people murdered all the time, and white people are the problem, and white people did this and white people did that. Here's my personal opinion, and I want you guys' thoughts. I believe that it will drive that kid further away from the solution and drive that kid into one or two positions. Either that kid grows up with this weird mindset that he is the problem, like he's an awful human being just for being white, or it makes him angry and he's like, I'm not the problem, I'm just a normal kid, and he actually starts to go to the radical right. And so what we see happening, I believe it's further pushing people farther and farther away instead of helping people to come to this even middle ground. Mr. Green, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I was definitely a victim of that. It wasn't until I went to a public high school that I really started to see diversity. Not everyone comes from a white neighborhood. Not everyone is wealthy. Not everyone's parents are married, yada, yada. But when I did start to learn about inequality and that the topics of suffering with inequality is because of the white man, maybe because of my lack of backbone, I started to hate myself. I started to blame myself for other people's suffering, even though people close to me would remind me, Mr. Green, you're not the issue. And then I thought the only way for me to do my part of the reparations is to hate my own kind.
Yeah.
This is something that I've struggled with a lot until recent years, actually, in becoming a biblical Christian that really helped sober my mind.
Yep.
But my identity was like, oh, I'm the cool white person that is for the minority. And I know what you're talking about completely happened to me. I was the pro Black Lives Matter. I even had people over at my house after the summer after high school, and we had dialogue. My heart was in it. I thought I was doing the right thing, but we were talking about white on black, white on Hispanic, white on Native American, and it was just all about how the white man keeps the people down. And that's what I was taught in college, especially. It was biased.
Yes.
When the topic was challenged, that no, professor, I don't believe there's systemic racism in policing, that student who had that opinion was shut down and ridiculed by the professor. And you're paying thousands of dollars to go to this is not a club, this is not a political party, but it was treated like that. But no, I can totally relate to I fell victim to the fact that, oh, I'm white, therefore I'm the problem. And it really affected how I interacted with people. It affected my confidence. And I thought I needed to be a certain way and that being white wasn't cool. So that's something I struggled with and still struggle with today.
And that's horrible that, you know. Mr. Black, what do you think about this polarization, like pushing white people in this?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think it's definitely true, because when you start upping the rhetoric, normal people will start hearing it.
Yeah.
I think for me, like my wife is African American. 2 of the best men at my wedding were African American. But even like if I like start watching certain like YouTube videos, I'm like, man, maybe things aren't that good. I'm like, wait, no.
Right.
1, like Christ, everyone's equal, and 2, I know I'm falling for this. And I know people who are African American who are great people, but like when you keep hearing it, when they keep preaching it to you, that's the stuff. And I think what's going to happen, and I think is really bad, is that white people are going to start like really recognizing like they're white, like they're different, and like, okay, well, people are attacking white culture. They're saying white people are like have a white property, and we need to take that white property from them. And it's like, hold on, what is going on, dude? I just play basketball on the weekends. Like, what are you talking? Like, I'm a janitor. Like, and what's going to happen is that as you keep upping the rhetoric and you keep pushing things forward and you keep trying to strive for justice by putting other people down or trying to get equity, instead of raising African Americans up and trying to help them, you're going to push the other group down. It's not going to go well. Yeah. Because it's like the same thing where it's like, okay, you can kind of view it as like a Marxian, like white is property, African Americans don't have property, therefore we have to take that property from from whites and transfer it to African Americans, kind of like institutionalized power and property. Yeah. And I think it's like, okay, how about instead of doing that, we just teach people to govern effectively? Like, how about we just have equal protection under the laws? In terms of like reparations or anything like that, I don't know exactly that history. I think there's a great guy called Thomas Sowell, who's an African American professor and talks about these things. I think he's spoken on it. I'm not for it or against it at this point. I don't really know that much. I would have to look into it more. I know San Francisco is about to try it.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what? I think that's fine. I think that's what America's for, is that we have different states that try different things and we see the results. Yep. So if San Francisco is going to do that, I say they should go for it. And we should see how it goes. If it works, it works, and that's great. If it doesn't go great, if it doesn't work, then we'll find out. But I think in these things, it's like, is that we need to shut down the rhetoric hard, and we can start trying things through the states to see what works. Like, for example, we know what doesn't work in Chicago. We know what doesn't work in Baltimore. We know what doesn't work. Yeah. We know these things don't work. So then let's stop trying them and let's try something new. Let's find out where do African Americans succeed the most? Yeah. Where do they have the highest standard of living? Where do they report the greatest number of happiness? Yes. Okay, let's look at that and try to copy it in other places. Boom. Because if we have that and we do that, then we can actually find solutions to these problems. Yes. And I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I don't know, but I think this is one way to actually find it.
Correct. Yeah, and what I want to tell big media is tell the truth. I mean, just tell the truth. Like, we're destroying lives because we do not tell the truth. And this is God's judgment on the people. This is God's judgment. Like, we're straying further and further away from the truth the more we progress into this future. But I love what you were saying, Mr. Black. The future can be bright if we change the way that we view things, if we change the way that we speak about things. We're all for free speech. Speak your mind. Yeah. Speak your mind. Whatever, dude. But big media, you're destroying people's lives by telling lies. And that's just what it is. I want to bring up something else that's very prevalent. I've seen this in all communities, Asians, especially Indians, Native American Indians, Black people, Hispanics. I've seen this victim culture that I can be racist toward white people. I have the right to be racist toward white people because white people murdered, raped, and oppressed and destroyed my people in ancient times. So because of this, I have the right to be racist toward these people because they received all the goods. And I just want to speak on this real quick. In my opinion, historically, you look at white Anglo-Saxon, I would say Anglo-Saxon civilizations in Europe, okay, around Europe. These were very dominant people. I think the facts in the history show that these people conquered the majority of the world. We're not talking about Genghis Khan and other African civilizations, but white culture has spread throughout the world and conquered the majority of the world. I'm sorry, not white culture, but white ancient civilizations. So I understand. I actually sympathize with these people when they say that, because for the most part, I believe that it is true. You know, the Portuguese and the Spanish came to the Southern Americas, the South Americas, and they murdered, destroyed all types of all types of peoples. And so what's my point in bringing that up? I believe that the history and the facts show like this is true. Does it give the whole picture? No, it doesn't. But even with that, hundreds upon hundreds of years in the future, why are we holding on to this?
Well, I think part of that is we start going down in history. I think America is specifically unique because this didn't really end until like the 1960s where African Americans. That was only like 60 years ago. That's one generation. And I think America, since we're such a young nation, we've only been around like 300 400 years.
Yeah.
Is that in terms of our time frame, it's been very recent, and we're just coming out of it. And since we're such a young nation, we want things to go quickly. Like we still have, I think there's still like my great-great-grandfather or my great-grandfather like fought in the Civil War to help free slaves.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, that's not far removed from me.
Yeah, it's not.
Like you can talk about like, okay, the Roman colonization, rape and pillage of Britain.
Right.
Well, that was actually like 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for Americans is that since we have such a short time frame or such a time preference, is that we want things to be fixed and to go quickly.
Interesting.
And that the only way that's going to happen is through tyranny, is through like hurting other people. Is that America has a deep wound.
Yes.
There is a deep wound in America, but it needs to heal, and it'll heal slowly, and it'll heal over time because it's been one generation.
Yeah.
And even after that one generation, like our Secretary of Defense is African American. We've had a black president.
Right.
Like in terms of like time frame, is that like they have elevated quickly. Like African Americans have elevated quickly in the United States because of great men like Frederick Douglass.
Yes.
And you have all these great people because African Americans are like, they're not special. They have great men and women among them. Like, and that's kind of the thing where it's like, well, like racist people would be like, yeah, they're not really great people among them. That's why we have to do affirmative action and stuff like that. It's like, no, like there are African Americans who are geniuses, who are incredible, who are hardworking. And we need a society that can allow them to raise to the top. And then over time, there'll still be poor whites, there'll be poor blacks, but it'll be like a same distribution. And over time, like things will heal. Like America needs time to heal. I think that's kind of my opinion on it because you look at like whites conquering the world. That was very recent too. Like the English Empire fell in like 1960, the Commonwealth.
Yep.
Before that though, like you have civilizations like the Bantu people took over sub-Saharan Africa. You have the Songhai and the Moroccans who took over North Africa.
Yeah.
The Carthaginians were African.
Boom.
And they were the main competitor of Rome, like the Punic Wars. You have in South Asia, you have the Khmer and the Vietnamese, and then You have China, which is one of the longest reigning history. In India, you have all these incredible cultures.
Yes.
You have all these incredible people. Where there was a giant empire.
Yep. Genghis Khan. Yeah.
Genghis Khan took over. You say that Rome took over the world. No, they took over a penny compared to Mongols' quarter. Like, it's insane.
Yes.
You have the Maori. You have the people of the ocean. You have all these incredible cultures and nations. Is that what happens is that we focus on Western culture and we focus on America and Europe because we're in it.
Yes.
Like the Vietnamese can hate the Khmer, or the Cambodians can hate the Vietnamese because there's been a long history of that. And that's what they care about. They don't care about Americans. But it's just at this point in history, like, because of where we're at, like we can't view it in terms of long history. We're constantly fighting the battle now and wanting quick results because we're Americans. We're very efficient people.
Yeah.
But I think we just need to cool everything down. We need to take important, good steps to take care of the issues and then let time heal all wounds.
That's awesome. Mr. Blue, what do you think about this this deep wound within America, this and people who identify with this victimization that, hey, because my people were oppressed, 50 years ago or hundreds of years ago, I have the right to be racist toward white people.
Right. So I cannot relate to knowing that my ancestors were enslaved. That's something that would probably affect how I identify in society where it has been a country ran by a certain type of race for the most of its history. But I'd say it's an invalid argument because even if my dad is racist, I'm not racist.
Yeah.
So how I do understand like hey, there was injustice in this country. There still is injustice in this country. But the stats you read just shut up the argument.
Completely.
The police brutality numbers. It's just I've used Twitter on and off for almost 10 years, and it's easy. It's right there. There you scroll and you read different titles of articles, and it's like, for example, black man shot and killed by police in Chicago. Oh, that's a retweet because it's just showing that it's racist. But how many people on Twitter are going to be like, no, let's see what actually happened. No, I'm going to click on it, going to open it, I'm going to read it, then I'm going to read what actually happened. Because
yes,
living in a country like this, you're able to opinionate what you post.
Boom.
And I just feel like it's our responsibility to... Well, it's like, why are we... What are we doing? What's the point of holding a grudge against someone? What this is not progress. Progress is, hey, maybe 150 years ago your lineage was messed up and they did terrible things to my lineage. Like if I was bullied when I was a kid, to still hold on to that is just completely goes against every Christian belief about forgiveness. But it's a completely different argument when I'm not the racist. It's like in the Bible, no father is responsible for their children's sins, and no child is responsible for their father's sins. But people are upset about something, and an easy outlet is to go the route of, oh, well, your great grandparents are racist, therefore I can shame your culture.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I think last words you guys want to say before we close out.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I believe that America is this incredible country, Mr. Green and Mr. Black. I believe that the solution starts from within. What am I doing? How am I progressing? I'm not a victim, actually. I'm not a victim of everything happening around us. I have the solutions, and the solution is to love people. And I know the best way to love people is through loving God.
I would say for my final statement is that we need leaders who are wise among us. We need people who know how to handle situations and lead this country and lead the nation. The news media, our institutions, we need to have people who are truly wise and who take everything according to justice. And in a way that doesn't harm others. And I think is that everyone who listens to this should pray to give our leaders wisdom.
Yes.
Because even though, none of us are special, we're not crazy people who are in the thrones of government. We're just people who are normal, who have normal lives and normal jobs. And through listening to us, you're like, okay, here's some ideas that I can take. Oh yeah, some of these guys are some of this opinion is bad, some of this opinion is bad, but this opinion is really good and I can take it. Is that at the end of the day, just act with wisdom.
Yes.
Amen. I think Mr. Blue made some great points to call out some of the mainstream media, but if you are listening to this, I think a challenge for you is to like make decisions for yourselves and see that there's the media, most of it is driven to create an opinion for you, but we have the freedom to make our own opinions and to live a sane, pure, quality life. I think the standard of the Bible, I can sound religious, but just looking at how a man like Christ, who was without blemish, no sin, perfection, just dealt with it all his whole life, and he didn't play the victim. He never played the victim, and I think that's the solution to leaving white people alone. Is if you are a victim of something, it's not eye for an eye. It's wow, how can I move on from this and make the world better? So that's what I got to say about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for listening and watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll have more videos later. Have a good day.